This episode surveys notable cases that reached resolution and intriguing tales of the paranormal. Near midnight on February 12, 1975, a fire erupted on the 11th floor of One World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, New York, quickly spreading to the 9th and the 14th floors. 50 maintenance workers were inside as 132 firefighters tackled the blaze, which was brought under control without any fatalities but left 64 people injured, including 16 firefighters. The damage totaled $2 million and in 2024 terms would be equivalent to about $1.6 million. Months later, in May of 1975, 19-year-old custodian Oswald Ororo was charged with arson, claiming the fire reflected his anger toward his employer and a lack of recognition. No public record of his fate after the arrest could be found. In 1981, a sprinkler system valued at $45 million was installed in both World Trade Center towers. On February 22, 1975, a northbound train carrying skiers departed Oslo, Norway, while a southbound train packed with skiers on the same track from Tatum headed in the opposite direction, with about 800 passengers aboard on each train. Half a mile from the Trenton train station, the two trains collided head-on, killing 27 people, including 7 children, and injuring 25 more. It was the worst peacetime train disaster in Norway's history. The Oslo-bound train had been running late. The engineer waited and allowed the southbound train to pass, after which new safety precautions were introduced to Norwegian trains and railways. On the same day, Drew Barrymore was born in Culver City, California. Her parents were John Drew Barrymore and Jade Barrymore, and she came from a long line of actors. She began acting as a child, with her first film role in Altered States, and achieved international fame in 1982 as part of E.T., the Extraterrestrial. After the film, she became the youngest person to host Saturday Night Live as a preteen. Her mother exposed her to nightlife, and she battled drugs and alcohol during her teens, which led to fewer acting offers until 1995, when she founded Flower Films. This revived her career, and she later starred in and produced numerous films, including Charlie's Angels, The Wedding Singer, and Never Been Kissed. In September 2020, she launched The Drew Barrymore Show, and as of this recording, she remains the host. On February 25, 1975, Baby Come to Me by Patty Austin and James Ingram topped the Billboard charts, while the film The Towering Inferno led the box office. 9-year-old Marsha Trimble lived with her family in Green Hills, an affluent Nashville, Tennessee neighborhood. Her father, Charles, worked as a salesman for an industrial supply company, and her mother, Virginia, was a homemaker. She had a 12-year-old brother named Chuck. On February 25, 1975, Marsha and Chuck attended school and returned home. Afterward, Marsha watched an episode of Gilligan's Island, then went out to deliver Girl Scout cookies she had ordered. She walked with her friend March Egerton, who lived nearby. Charlie, Marsha's father, was driving home from work when he spotted the girls, stopped the car to speak with them, and Marsha said she would be home soon. When Marsha got home, her grandmother was there to drop off dessert. Marsha gave her the cookie she had ordered and went inside to tell her mother she would drop off one last box of cookies to a neighbor, Marie Maxwell. Maxwell was not at home the first time Marsha went out. Marsha told her mother she would be right back. This was between 5:15 and 5:25 p.m. Marsha left home while her brother Chuck was playing basketball in the driveway. She should have been gone only a few minutes, but when she did not return, the family began searching. Marie Maxwell, whose house Marsha had been heading toward that afternoon, said Marsha did not come to her home. Maxwell recalled that Marsha was seen around 5:30 in the evening in the driveway of the next-door neighbor with two males, a shorter man and a taller man, though the others were obscured by a hedge. The taller man wore a long, dark overcoat. Maxwell saw Marsha with a cookie box and expected her to drop it off, so she prepared her checkbook. However, Marsha did not show up. Her family drove the neighborhood searching, and about 2 hours after she left, they reported her missing. The police launched an immediate search, and later the FBI joined the investigation. In interviews later, a witness saw a girl matching Marsha's description about 3/10 of a mile from Maxwell's sighting around 5:30 in the evening, and she did not have the cookie box. Another witness said that about 5 minutes later she was a short distance away, walking in the opposite direction toward home, still without the box and looking confused. Detectives suspected a thief had stolen the cookie box, which contained about $20, and Marsha had chased after them. The 9-year-old was not found that night. By the next day, hundreds of volunteers joined the search. Police established a command post in the family's home, and the FBI became involved. The case remained unsolved. 2 tracking dogs from Philadelphia were brought in after Marsha's disappearance, yet they unearthed no trace of the girl. Marie Maxwell, the last person to see Marsha, underwent hypnosis and described a taller figure to a sketch artist. Maxwell said she could not see their faces because they stood behind the hedge. Marsha's back showed she carried her cookie box, and a taller man in a long, dark overcoat was seen, though the sketch depicted a young white man with long hair. Many felt the sketch resembled the leader of a local religious sect, whose rumors spoke of abducting devout Christian children to secret sites for instruction. The group claimed offices across the United States, including one in Fort Worth, Texas. A month earlier, 3 girls vanished from Fort Worth: Mary Rachel Traka, Lisa Renee Wilson, and Julianne Mosley, together known as the Fort Worth Trio. Those young women have never been found, and their case remains unsolved. The police investigated the sect, but the inquiry did not bring them closer to finding Marsha. March 28, 1975, marked the 31st day since Marsha went missing. It was Good Friday and her 10th birthday. Devout Christians, the Trimble family, fasted and prayed, certain that God would restore their daughter and work a miracle. 2 days later, on Easter Sunday, they attended church and returned home to the news that Marsha's body lay in a seldom-used garage behind their house, about 200 yards away. The garage, described in the media as a mere shed, and in the book as a Marva shed with no windows or doors, housed various items, and the owner's brother-in-law found the girl there while seeking a cover for an outboard motor. Police were stunned, for at least 9 people had already searched the garage, 6 volunteers after the disappearance, and 3 police academy cadets the next day, yet nothing had been found. There were 3 explanations offered for the late discovery, the first of which is not stated in full in this excerpt. The body lay in the garage, almost invisible amid a jumble of items, so much so that a detective nearly overlooked it until someone pointed it out. One early theory held that the clutter itself had concealed the corpse, making detection by even seasoned investigators difficult. A second theory proposed that the killer kept Marsha alive for days or weeks, and killed her in the garage, or elsewhere, and then dumped the body there. However, the pathologist concluded she was killed the same night she disappeared, having been clothed and sexually assaulted, with the semen found in her vagina and on her clothes. A third possibility suggested that the body had been moved from another location and left in the garage, but this theory faced problems. Why dump so close to the family home when authorities and neighbors were on alert, unless the killer lived nearby and lacked access to a vehicle? The FBI profile pointed to a white teenage boy who knew Marsha, and among the last to see her was 15-year-old Jeffrey, a neighbor 5 houses down. Police interviewed Jeffrey within 1 hour of Marsha going missing. He was not at home, and hours later he learned investigators were seeking him. He said his mother had ordered cookies, but he did not have the money for them and would pay later. When asked to empty his pockets, he produced a $5 bill, some change, a partial roll of pennies, and a box of condoms, which investigators found odd since he claimed to have no money for the cookies. They also noted that Marsha's cookie box with the money was missing, and Jeffrey explained he worked for Peggy Morgan, who lived next door. Peggy Morgan ran a home daycare, where Jeffrey worked alongside Amy Norval. After Mara arrived at his home, he went to the daycare. He learned Marsha was missing and searched, ultimately leaving Rocky behind. He claimed the condoms were bought for a weekend concert. During a visit, Peggy Morgan insisted Jeffrey hadn't harmed Mara and said he had been with her all evening. The police found that claim odd since Marsha was missing at the time. Morgan's protective stance toward Jeffrey fueled the investigators' suspicions. Jeffrey's long hair and sneakers with the word "you" on them drew extra attention. Days after the kidnapping, his parents learned he was a person of interest, hired an attorney, and stopped cooperating, including refusing a polygraph. He later took a private polygraph that deemed him truthful about Mara, then a second at the police station that he also passed, though investigators kept probing his alibi. Jeffrey said he was working at the Morgan home daycare when Marsha disappeared, and Morgan claimed to have been with him, though not entirely truthfully. She stayed home until 6:15 p.m., then went bowling with Amy Norval. He arrived that afternoon hot and sweaty, and the police learned from the boys he had supposedly played basketball with that story was false. He asked the boys to say he had played with them if asked. The police questioned Amy Norval, who said Jeffrey came early, left briefly around 4:30 p.m., and returned, at which time he encountered Marsha walking with her friend March Ederton. She confirmed they spoke with Jeffrey. Norval said she and Jeffrey left the daycare between 5:10 p.m. and 5:15 p.m. for McDonald's, returning about half an hour later. Crucially, Norval added that Morgan had supplied the money for the meal, not Jeffrey, a detail the police grasped since Jeffrey had claimed the money in his pocket was only change for the food. Norval and Morgan left again at about 6:15 p.m. When it was time to go bowling, Jeffrey stayed at the daycare until the other children were picked up. Amy Norville raised troubling claims about him, alleging a relationship between 15-year-old Jeffrey and Peggy Morgan, who was 32. She also said he had kissed a 9-year-old girl at the daycare, and the girl's mother promptly removed her. Peggy Morgan, who ran the daycare, was questioned and denied any affair with Jeffrey, and she testified that the girl left for reasons other than a kiss. Peggy Morgan took a polygraph and passed, yet investigators remained uneasy about Jeffrey's behavior. For instance, Why would Jeffrey ask his friend Salai to provide an alibi for earlier in the day before the murder? And if Amy Norville had received money for food, why did Jeffrey say he got the money there? The central issue was that Jeffrey still seemed to have an alibi. Marsha disappeared after leaving her home between 5:15 and 5:25. Jeffrey left Morgan's home around 4:30 and returned shortly afterward, near the time Marsha went missing. Norville claimed they were headed for McDonald's, and police doubted the exact timings, thinking Jeffrey may have returned to the daycare after 5:30 before they went to the restaurant. Marie Maxwell, who had seen Marsha talking to two people around the time of her disappearance, was asked if Jeffrey was one of them, and the police noted that the sketch resembled him. Maxwell had been questioned many times and said she had a gut feeling it could be him, even suggesting that one of the two might have been someone Marsha had walked with earlier. Examinations of Marsha's body showed the soles of her shoes bore soil, indicating she walked into the garage willingly, with no sign she had been dragged. An entomologist concluded that the insects indicated the body had not been moved since the night she disappeared. Blood, pooling in a single resting position, likewise suggested the body had remained in place. Thus, investigators concluded she was lured or led into the garage where she was killed. The garage had been searched by at least 9 people, yet the body remained undiscovered for years, and one of those searchers was Jeffrey Walk. For years, the police continued to investigate, ruling out several suspects, but Jeffrey Walk could not be eliminated. By June 1976, he remained a person of interest. For years, Jeffrey stood as the sole suspect in Marsha Trimble's case, and the rumor mill among the neighborhood teased him relentlessly. He answered with sharp, flippant remarks like, "Yeah, I killed her," or "Yeah, I raped her," though there was never any physical evidence tying him to the 1977 murder of the 9-year-old Mara. At that time, Jeffrey was 18 and employed at a restaurant, where an undercover officer posed as a patron to coax information about Mara, but the young man offered nothing incriminating. One detective sought to spark a confession by approaching Jeffrey at the bar. Upon recognizing the officer, Jeffrey grew fearful and told him that the detective was trying to link him to the girl's murder, noting Mara had been found wrapped in a tarp. That detail drew investigators' attention because one of the coverings over Mara's body was an old shower curtain with a paint spot, leading them to suspect it had served as a drop cloth for a painting job. Paint samples were taken from several homes, and the FBI compared them, determining they matched the paint from the house where Jeffrey worked at the daycare, and the same house he had been in on the night Mara disappeared, August 28, 1979. 4 years after the murder, 20-year-old Jeffrey Walk was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, and because the crime occurred when he was 15, he was to be tried as an adult. 8 months later, the District Attorney General announced that he would not present the case to the grand jury, and days afterward he admitted that the arrest had been premature. It emerged that the curtain paint was not uncommon, as several houses in the neighborhood shared the same color. Another issue concerned the money Jeffrey had in his pocket. Police suspected it had been stolen from Mara, but he claimed it came from his newspaper route, explaining that his mother had not given him money for the girl's cookies, and that he did not feel obliged to pay with his own money when his mother would. In August of 1980, a year after his arrest, all charges were dropped. 2 years later, when the district attorney sought re-election, he described the arrest as a grave injustice. Yet many investigators remained convinced of his guilt and suspicion continued to hover over him. Mara's murder took a terrible toll on her family. In 1989, her parents, Charles and Virginia, divorced, with Virginia noting they coped with the tragedy in different ways. 3 days after the divorce was finalized, Charles died of lung and liver cancer at the age of 52. Virginia stayed in the family home until the late 1990s, and the case's shadow lingered, reshaping their lives. An aging house stood abandoned on the property until a new one rose in 1990, signaling a turning point in a case that had remained unsettled for decades. The police announced they were reopening the investigation and that evidence would be retested with DNA analysis. A semen stain found on Marsha's pants yielded a DNA profile, and one of the first comparisons was with Jeffrey Wilmack, which turned out not to be a match. Even after that initial result, suspicion around Jeffrey persisted for many years, though nothing linked him to the crime. Over the years, investigators expanded their screening, testing 7 more neighbors who lived near the murder scene, yet none matched the DNA. By 1996, advances in DNA technology allowed a complete profile of the killer to be built, and more than 100 people were examined. Still, no match emerged. Then, in November of 2007, a suspect who had never attracted police attention surfaced, indicating that decades of change might finally reveal new leads. Between 1975 and 2007, the cultural landscape shifted dramatically, providing a backdrop to the case. In 1975, audiences were captivated by films such as Monty Python and the Holy Grail, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and The Stepford Wives, while the documentary Grey Gardens offered a stark portrait of a mother and daughter connected to former First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. That documentary later inspired a dramatized television film by Drew Barrymore. By 2007, mainstream releases included 300, Juno, and Superbad. The period also produced enduring songs like Love Will Keep Us Together, Rhinestone Cowboy, and Philadelphia Freedom, followed years later by hits from Flo Rida with T-Pain, Leona Lewis, and Alicia Keys. On television, beloved shows such as Starsky and Hutch and Welcome Back. Cotter debuted in the mid-70s while Keeping Up with the Kardashians, The Big Bang Theory, and Mad Men found prominence in 2007. In literature, prominent titles from 1975 included Where Are the Children by Mary Higgins Clark and Terms of Endearment by Larry McMurtry, with later bestsellers in 2007 including Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, and 13 Reasons Why. In the spring of 2007, detectives revisited a murder that had occurred 3 weeks before Marsha's death in February 1975. The case centered on Sarah D., who went by Sally, a 19-year-old sophomore at Vanderbilt University in Nashville. Sally's parents were divorced and both practiced medicine, and her father served as a professor of medicine at Vanderbilt, the home of Sally's family, where she had lived from age 9 to 18, was located a short distance away from Marsha's residence, effectively placing their families within a single block of one another. Marsha Trimble's body was found on the same street as the DEA's home in 1975. Sally, who lived alone in an apartment a block from the university, went on a date the night of February 1st that year. They watched the Orient Express at a movie theater, then moved to a bar before returning to his fraternity house, where they drank late into the night and Sally began to feel ill. Her date drove her home, and Sally worked as a dormitory night clerk on campus. Sally did not report for a shift on the night of February 2nd, and her father was notified. He and Sally's brother went to her apartment, and her father, who had a key, found Sally's body on the bed. It was determined she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. There were no signs of a break-in, so police suspected she may have known her killer, or that the killer had waited in the hallway or followed her inside. The case went cold for decades. In the spring of 2007, a family member contacted Nashville police to ask about any progress, and investigators chose to reopen the case in May 2007. They forwarded the crime scene evidence to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab, where a DNA profile was created and uploaded to CODIS, but no match was found at that time. In October 2007, investigators received surprising news. The DNA matched another homicide, the murder of Marsha Trimble. The two killings occurred 23 days apart and within less than 5 miles of each other, and both victims had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Although the cases shared striking similarities, they had not been connected before. There were suspects in Sally's murder who had not been considered in relation to Marsha's. For Sally's case, pubic hair from a black person was found at the scene, and the FBI profile suggested the killer was likely a young white man. Green Hills, Marsha's neighborhood, was predominantly white, and no one reported seeing a black man in the area around the time of Marsha's murder. One suspect in Sally's murder was Jerome Sidney Barrett, a 26-year-old man born in April 1948 in Memphis. Barrett began running afoul of the law after high school graduation, including a suspected robbery for which he was not charged. According to the book A Season of Darkness, Barrett was detained for 2 days in connection with Sally's murder but was not charged. In 1968, Barrett faced charges related to a series of robberies. However, the available record ends there, with no definitive outcome stated. After an unsettled start, he did not remain unpunished. He joined the Army and served as a helicopter mechanic in Vietnam. In September of 1969, he was court-martialed for going AWOL after his tour. He returned to the United States, sought mental health help, and was discharged in 1971, returning to his hometown of Memphis. Back in Memphis, he earned money by taking part in street fights and kept clashing with the law. In 1973, he was arrested after stabbing and attempting to rape a woman. Though the charges were dropped, later that year he was convicted of several sex crimes, including having sex with a minor. He received a 10-year sentence and was sent to the Tennessee State Prison in Nashville. After serving about 1.5 years, he was paroled and did not leave Nashville until March 12, 1975, a few weeks after Marsha's murder. Police were called to an apartment building in Nashville after a caller said a man had broken into her apartment. Officers found a man with a loaded gun, wearing a ski mask and a long dark overcoat, attempting to break into other units. He was arrested and identified as Drew Barrymore. Investigating Barrett, the police linked him to 3 violent crimes that had occurred weeks earlier. On February 16, 1975, a 23-year-old Belmont University student was raped at a knife point in her dorm, and several items were stolen. On February 23, 1975, a 24-year-old woman was stabbed outside her home in Nashville, though she survived, and on March 9, 1975, a 22-year-old woman was raped at gunpoint. The police searched Barrett's apartment and found items belonging to the Belmont student. and the other 2 women identified Barrett as their attacker. In custody, Barrett confessed to raping the Belmont student in February 1976 and was convicted of rape, receiving a 60-year sentence. He was paroled in 2002 after serving more than 26 years. He had been a suspect in Sally Dia's murder because the killings aligned with Barrett's violent crime spree. A detective in Sally's case had asked the FBI to compare Barrett's hair to the hair found on Sally, but the request never materialized. The police believed Barrett was a viable suspect in Sally and Marsha's murders. Since both occurred during his spree, Sally was murdered 2 weeks before the Belmont incident, and Marsha was killed 9 days after the Belmont attack and 2 days before Barrett stabbed a woman in Nashville. After his release in 2002, he returned to Memphis to live with his elderly father, ran a long hair business, and led the neighborhood watch. In October of 2007, police obtained a warrant to collect Barrett's DNA. Weeks later, the DNA matched the samples from both crime scenes. In November 2007, Barrett was arrested for Sally Dia's murder, and investigators could place him at the scene. In the autumn of 1974, Jerome Barrett was arrested on the Vanderbilt campus for soliciting donations for the Nation of Islam. He also had a history of attacking young women around the same age as Sally, and Barrett had been convicted of having sex with a minor in 1973. Most of his victims were in their early 20s, so Mara did not fit his usual profile. The police could not place him in Marsha's neighborhood, and no one reported seeing a tall black man in that predominantly white area. Barrett's lawyer argued that this created a laboratory mix-up, or that DNA could have been planted. In fact, the original investigators did not believe the DNA conclusively proved Barrett killed Marsha. They still suspected Jeffrey Wack, even though there was no forensic link. Police kept digging for a link between Barrett and Marsha's neighborhood. 15 days after Marsha's murder, on March 12, 1975, he was arrested for breaking into apartments, wearing a long, dark overcoat. Marie Maxwell saw Marsha speaking to a man in a long, dark overcoat. She did not get a good look at his face or know his race. The district attorney announced they had enough evidence, and in June 2007, Jerome Barrett was charged with Marsha Trimble's murder. Barrett went to trial for Sally Dia's murder in January 2008, 34 years after the crime. The 4-day trial concluded with the jury deliberating for an hour and a half, and Barrett was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. About 6 months later, in July 2008, he stood trial for Marsha Trimble's murder, the strongest evidence being the DNA found on Marsha's clothes, a 1 in a trillion match. The defense noted that Barrett had not been seen in the neighborhood and did not resemble the description Maxwell offered. Maxwell testified she saw 3 people that day: Mara, a short man, and a tall man. She did not see the tall man's face and believed the sketch had little value due to the pressure of the moment. 2 inmates who had been incarcerated with Barrett testified that he admitted killing women but gave no specific details. After a 3-day trial, the jury deliberated for 7 hours over 2 days and found Barrett guilty of second-degree murder. At sentencing, Marsha's mother, Virginia Ritter, who was then using the last name Ritter, told Barrett she forgave him, but Barrett waived his right to attend the hearing. He was sentenced to 44 years for Marsha's murder. As of the time of this recording, Barrett, now 75, is serving a sentence at the Morgan County Corrections Department. If you have cases to suggest, please visit the program's website. If this episode intrigued you, consider reading A Season of Darkness by Doug Jones and Phyllis Scoble. The book proved an invaluable resource for this podcast, offering many details we couldn't cover. That's all for today. Thanks again for listening.